Where reporter Griselda Lewis is standing by with the former president of Ireland, Mary Robinson. Hi, Griselda.
Well, thank you very much, Blaine, and I think many would share the sentiments of Mama Graça Machel in hoping that many South Africans will come here to Delta Park here in Johannesburg to come and watch those 100 trees grow, planted, of course, to remember the legacy of former President Nelson Mandela. Joining me now is one of the elders, set up in 2007, been with the elders since the founding of that by Tata Nelson Mandela and Mama Graça Machel, and the former island president, also former commissioner of the United Nations Human Rights Commission, the former president of Ireland, Mary Robinson. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Madam President, I think quite a significant day here in South Africa today as we count down to what have been Madiba's 100th birthday tomorrow. The significance of planting these 100 trees.
I think this has been a very special event for the elders.
Yes.
How were we going to mark our 10th anniversary and the centenary of our founder, Nelson Mandela Madiba? We decided to focus on the communities around the world that live by his values.
Yes.
These are difficult times of bad leadership, of populism, autocratic leaders, etc. But there are so many brave communities who are doing such good work for their communities. And we have found these 100 sparks of hope. And they were represented by a number who'd come here to Joburg from Mozambique and from other parts of Africa and elsewhere. And Tunisia, a wonderful young activist from Tunisia, Aisha, whom I know and who Graça also knows. And the idea is to say we have to reinforce and reinvigorate the values that Madiba lived with his long walk to freedom, his freedoms. So all year we've been focusing on peace, on health, on justice and on equality. And these sparks of hope reflect those values. And the planting of the trees was symbolic because these children, when they watch the trees grow,
yes,
will remember that there are these communities that work to these values, and I hope they too will be inspired. We have been very inspired.
Yeah. These are certainly sparks of hope across the various sectors. We're talking about health, we're talking about perhaps education and a number of other spheres as well. Why was it important to get these 100 sparks of hope that would signify what kind of work or the values that Madiba stood for that's being done across the board?
Well, the elders do a lot of work in different countries. We will go from here to Zimbabwe, in fact. Kofi Annan, our chair, Lakhdar Brahimi and myself. We have been recently in Kuwait. We have been in talking about health in different countries, in Indonesia. Shortly, I will also be talking in San Francisco, in California,
yes,
with Ricardo Lagos, another elder, about universal access to health. So we are working for these values, working in countries, but we felt to honour Madiba, the best thing was to remember he loves people and he loves young people, yes, and he loves women. Yes. And so the way to do this was to have these sparks of hope inspire all of us. They are on the website. The Walking Together campaign has been a great connection for the elders with people all over the world. We've had something like 67 million people following us on social media. So it's a way of, it's not really about the elders so much as pushing down to communities to continue with Madiba's values, and hopefully more leaders will also be inspired, and we will really take seriously the 2030 agenda with the sustainable goals and the climate agreement in Paris.
One of those values that we always speak about during this time, and in fact throughout the year, is how Madiba stood for human rights, the human rights of all people. And I think it's quite important to mention, given the fact that you were also the United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights. How would you say the world is faring today? We saw quite a number of those sparks of hope, those representing those organizations, speak about some of the atrocities that are taking place in some of these countries.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned human rights, because this year we marked the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As High Commissioner for Human Rights, I led marking the 50th anniversary. Do you know who I did it with? The year was launched here in South Africa by President Nelson Mandela and myself. He gifted me with launching it and launching the South African Plan of Action for Human Rights. That was 20 years ago.
Yes.
Today things are not so good at all. The present High Commissioner Commissioner I met very recently, and we deliberated how difficult things have become. Look at Syria, look at Yemen, look at North Korea as a threat to the world that's still there. The fact that civil society space has been shrinking, it's more difficult for activists and human rights defenders, and including defenders of land and water rights around the world, are being killed or harassed and driven from their homes. So these are very difficult times, and we need to remember the wise words of Desmond Tutu. I was on a panel with him in New York, and a journalist accused him of being an optimist, and he said, "Oh no, dearie, I'm not an optimist, I'm a prisoner of hope." And that's a very profound idea, because if you're a prisoner of hope, then you don't see the glass necessarily half full, but you see something that you can work with, and that gives energy to act, to be part of the change, the values, and that's what these sparks of hope have inspired us with.
I also saw on the programme that you spoke about issues of what Madiba's legacy looks like in the hands of young Africans. I have to ask, what does Madiba's legacy look like in the hands of young Africans? In particular, if you look at, I guess, leadership throughout the world today, which you already touched on, where young people will really need to draw inspiration from somewhere, because the likes of former President Nelson Mandela are no more.
Well, you heard young Aisha from Tunisia. I've met her before, speaking this morning. And she was speaking about the need for a Pan-Africanism. And she said it cannot be Pan-African unless it is feminist. It cannot be Pan-African unless it's led by young people. And she referenced the sparks of hope as being the way in which we can be hopeful. My friend Kumi Naidu has led Africans Rising. And it's Africans rising, not the countries, but the people.
Yes.
And rising for the values of Nelson Mandela. We have some leadership in the world. We're seeing good things happening in Ethiopia, for example, and Ethiopia and Eritrea. That gives us hope. There are things happening that are good. I belong to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation on African Leadership. We gave our prize this year to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first woman president to receive the prize. And she was the 5th prize winner in 10 years. And we ask, if you are giving a prize in Europe, would you give 5 prizes in 10 years for superb leadership, for exceptional leadership?
Yes.
I don't know. So Africa has more going than it thinks. It really has. It's a wonderful country, a continent with wonderful countries and people, and it is the founding of the elders, so we take our roots from Nelson Mandela himself, of course.
What would you like to see take shape as we look fast forward to tomorrow? Madiba would have been 100 years old. What do you think tomorrow most people should speak of in terms of what Madiba would have wanted to see had he still been alive?
Well, before we get to tomorrow, we have this excitement of President Obama
yes.
giving the its 16th Nelson Mandela Foundation address. I gave the 10th Nelson Mandela address in 2012, and I spoke truth to South Africa as a true friend. I said what people needed to hear, not what they wanted to hear. I hope President Obama will say that to the world, what we need to hear, not what we want to hear.
That's right.
And then we will have other events we will march to, we have been marching all year in our Walk Together campaign. It's walking together in the other's shoes, remembering the refugees, the migrants, the marginalised, those living in deep poverty, and really wanting the 2030 agenda to be an agenda that we all work for with collective solidarity between nations, and that we keep to the goals in the Paris Agreement, which is going to be tough. We need more renewable energy, we need a future for all, and particularly energy for the more than 1 billion people who don't have any electricity. The spark of hope from Mozambique, she was speaking about her reality.
Fascinating.
Yeah, fascinating. And she's bringing off-grid energy because she lived in a home with no light, with no energy. I'm very inspired by our sparks of hope, and I'm looking forward very much to these next 2 days, and I love being back in this country, and I'm looking forward to meeting your president, Cyril Ramaphosa.
That's right.
I know him very well, and he actually helped me when I was High Commissioner for Human Rights.
That's correct.
So I'm looking forward to seeing him again.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Madam President. All the best for the next 2 days.
Thank you.
All right. That was one of the elders, Mary Robinson, of course, the former President of Ireland as well, also served as the Commissioner at the United Nations for Human Rights, speaking about quite a number of things that she would like to see, in particular in that address in the next couple of hours by the former US President Barack Obama as he delivers that much anticipated lecture. But of course, these 100 sparks of hope who really gave testimony to some of the fantastic work that they're doing around the world, and these trees that have been planted here today to really signify that legacy of this former elder statesman who we will be celebrating. Tomorrow would have turned 100 years old, as the celebrations, of course, are in full swing.
Yeah, Griselda, thank you very much indeed for that lovely interview there. Griselda Lewis live for us in Delta Park, and the former president